Hello, my name is William the Avid reader, and today I'm reviewing The Road to Wigan Pier, written by George Orwell in 1937. So the book is in two parts. So the first is the working class conditions described, so near poverty levels. And the second part is Orwell's discussion of why socialism hasn't yet succeeded. First part, working class life. So first he starts out with explaining the lodging conditions of poor people when they rent some room of another family. So the family that rents out the place is usually ungrateful to the people staying, and they don't want them to stay there all day, but at the same time they don't want them to leave suddenly. So there's this kind of control that the landlords are trying to have on their tenants. And then Orwell talks about the miners. So first of all, when you go mining, you work 7.5 hours, but that does not include the 1 to 3 hours of crawling to partially walking, because it's thin, the cave. So you have to walk bent, and always really felt uncomfortable with that, and that's something you have to do since you're very young to be used to it. Then there's maybe another hour or two of taking the bus to get to their home, and the shifts are sometimes all screwed up. So if they first have a night shift and then a morning shift, and then there's thing about the wife maybe not making the breakfast because that's unlucky. And there's discussion of the housing of the miners. They live in these blocks, and the first floor is usually better than the second one, and it's quite a dirty place. They don't necessarily have usable beds, even though they have some. And then when they move into company housing, which is cleaner, but it doesn't feel like home for them. Then there's discussion of how unemployment works. So there's a lot of unemployed people, a lot more than the official figures. And remember, this is in the 30s where the depression may be still going on. So this is a completely different poverty situation than it is now in England. And you may have some people who are working but are barely making it, and they don't have any money to spend on other things, and they take up expenses that aren't necessary but they really want them. So they may decide to have a cup of tea or something nice to eat, even though they could eat something healthier for cheaper. But what's the point of living for them if they can't at least enjoy some of their food? So that's the first part. It's not as good as the second one. And this is how Orwell discusses why socialism hasn't yet succeeded in the working class and the proletariat and things like that. So it's a commentary on socialism. So first of all, there's these class prejudices, and even self-professed socialists who are middle class, so-called bourgeois, they still hold these bourgeois manners. And since they have these bourgeois manners, they aren't really identifying with the proletariat. So when they have these summer camps where people from the middle class and working class meet, those from the middle class, they have a good experience, but the proletariat, the working class people, they think it's a joke, they don't take it seriously. Orwell discusses the machine worship that exists, and that one of the reasons people dislike socialism is because socialism is connected to this modernization, and people hold true to their traditions. And here there's brought up of Aldous Huxley word, and that this may lead people, because they really believe in their traditions, they may choose fascism because socialism seems just a bunch of eccentric crankiness weirdos who are vegetarians and pacifists. So socialism isn't well expressed, Orwell thinks, and there's no good language or literature that the socialists have produced. Bringing up capital is irrelevant, nobody cares about that in the working class really. Orwell argues that you have to remember the basics in socialism, so that is the poor, the working class. There's a difference between social and economic class. So social class is your accent, your type of work. So there's a difference between working in a white collar job and a blue collar job, even if both may be working class. So Orwell says to overcome that and recognize that we are all proletariat, the working class, and unite and build a movement, maybe part of the Labour Party. Then the bourgeois may eventually disintegrate. You don't have to have a uniform manners, at least yet. So yeah, that's his discussion of socialism. And they need to remember that they're fighting against tyranny, which is, I would say, debatable. It's not really true, but yeah. And he says, otherwise, fascism will win. And he argues basically you only have two choices, fascism versus socialism. No, some people, especially on the right, believe that fascism is a form of socialism. And Orwell kind of says, yeah, it's fascism is socialism without any of the benefits. So yeah, how would I rate The Road to Wigan Pier? I would say 7 out of 10. It's a decent book. Now let's think about this. So Down and Out in Paris and London, it was a decent book and it didn't have really any good moments. Homage to Catalonia, the two last chapters were good. Here, the first part isn't that good, but the second part is decent. So the working class life, that's a bit boring, but Orwell's socialist commentary is interesting, although he makes a lot of wrongs. Like, he believes that socialism is necessary to alleviate the poor, and that now we've seen the development of the world, and yeah, socialism was not exactly needed, and socialism never succeeded in Britain, and Britain never became fascist. So yeah, this 7 out of 10. It's a decent book. It's the best of his non-fiction memoirs. But his fiction books in general, Approach for a Clergyman's Daughter, are much better. So you can, if you want to learn about the poor in England during the 30s, you read this, The Road to Wigan Pier. You can also read Down and Out in Paris and London. But this is a much more philosophical book. He discusses both the working class conditions and the philosophy that is needed to alleviate it. So yeah. Very decent book. So, George Orwell, you wrote a decent book. This was the Avid Reader's review of The Road to Wigan Pier, written by George Orwell in 1937. I am the Avid Reader, and I hope I will see you guys next time.